Good afternoon. It is truly an honor to be here. This is my first visit to Singapore, and certainly my first, well, I guess now it's my second visit to the university. I must say I'm very deeply impressed by both, and I'm very glad to have made a new circle of friends for whom I anticipate and hope for a long-term collaboration. The topic that we should be addressing, that I'll initiate here, will continue in the panel discussion, I think, is one of enormous relevance, this whole issue of resilience. It has, of course, a parallel in evolutionary biology, and that is the environment is constantly changing. That will be a truth that will be forever true. It always changes, and then what determines whether a species survives or whether it simply becomes extinct is a type of biological resilience. Can the species adapt to the changing environment and continue to thrive, to provide progeny, and so forth? And so what we're looking at here when we address this issue of mental resilience is, on the one hand, it could be so basic as one's own personal survival. If one is not resilient to facing the stress of final exams, facing the stress of an economic downturn, and so forth, actually one may become extinct as an individual. It could be that dire. But even if it's not that dire, we can raise a deeper issue, or maybe a more subtle issue. I don't know that it's deeper, but that is, even if we don't perish, even if we don't take the drastic step of terminating our own lives, do we flourish? Do we flourish as human beings? Do we find fulfillment? Do we find meaning in our lives? And I think that is a more subtle issue, for some of us perhaps as important as survival itself. In raising the issue of resilience, my mind immediately goes to the opposite. What is it that makes us not resilient? Why do some people fail to adapt? And again, bearing in mind in the back of the mind, why do some species fail to adapt? But coming back to the main theme, well, what is the opposite of resilience? Rigidity. Rigidity. Failure to engage with, to take account of, and respond to change. Especially novelty. Unprecedented change. So how can we, is this something that can be trained? Or, a reference was made to genes. Are some of us simply genetically programmed or more predestined, so to speak, to be more resilient and others less so? There may very well be genetic influences here. But I know some leading world leaders in the field of genetics, such as Eric Lander at MIT, and he was adamant when we spoke together about 5 years ago that genetics is not predestination. Genetics is not predetermination. That is, our behavior is not simply predetermined by our genes, nor by our brain chemistry for that matter. So coming back to this, what makes us rigid? What makes us locked into something that is relatively static, disengaged from the ongoing freshness, the novelty, the change that is reality itself? I will relate this to Buddhist practice, because much of my training has been in Buddhist philosophy, psychology, meditation. And that is, there is a Buddhist practice that some of you, perhaps many of you, are familiar with. Basic practice of mindfulness, a very simple form of mindfulness of attending to whatever is arising freshly in the present moment. So Jon Kabat-Zinn, in his mindfulness-based stress reduction, this is taught now in, I think, over 300 clinics worldwide. Very helpful for reducing stress. Stress is one indicator of people having a hard time dealing with change, a lack of resilience, locked into a type of rigidity. What is this mindfulness? It is a close attentiveness to what is actually taking place. A close attentiveness that is maybe introspective. What from moment to moment, from situation to situation, is actually taking place in our own minds. We can get locked into a rather static self-image. It happens frequently, especially in cases of low self-esteem. Especially in cases of low self-esteem. Of just regarding oneself as being unworthy, unlikable, not up to snuff, a disappointment, having failed to maybe achieve one's own ends or one's own ideals. Get locked into a static stereotype. I am a loser, I am inadequate, I'm an underachiever, I'm not worthy of other people's respect. Locked into a notion, an idea, a projection, and always relating to this static baggage that one carries in one's mind, that can actually disengage you from the momentary reality of your own existence. What is actually taking place from moment to moment to moment in the mind? From moment to moment, what is one's own behavior? Is it always the behavior of a loser? Or is it in fact much more diverse? Of course, it's always. None of us are homogeneous. None of us have the same mindset that carries through 24/7. And so mindfulness, I think, is a key, a very good entry point. It does not require religious belief or indoctrination. It doesn't require any leap of faith. It is simply attending closely what is actually happening and being prepared for, tuned to, receptive to novelty. That which is unprecedented, unexpected, fresh. So mindfulness can be directed inwardly to one's own mental states, one's speech, one's body. Very importantly, it can be directed to our interpersonal relationships. Just as we can superimpose stereotypes, these locked-in static notions about ourselves. Do we not do this also towards the people around us? Especially people in the media. Which of us, for example, to take a world character, which of us doesn't have a static notion of President George Bush? Whether you think he's a great leader or maybe not so great, you know, whatever the notion is, it's probably pretty well locked in by now. We've heard him in, you know, and so for somebody to say, oh, but your view of George Bush is really wrong, here's what I think, we're probably going to be quite resistant to that. Because we get locked in, that, no, I know George Bush, I've seen him on television so many times, I know that guy, right? And so it's locked in. Now, interestingly enough, the Dalai Lama has met him personally, he says, oh, I love George Bush. It stuns us, you know, some of us who really have great admiration for the Dalai Lama. He's not locked into a stereotype, he's actually engaging with him and finding, as a human being, engaging with the Dalai Lama, he's actually quite a likable chap. And then the Dalai Lama added, and by the way, some of his policies are quite catastrophic. So there's an attentiveness there. It's not naive. It's not a Pollyanna syndrome of seeing everyone through rose-tinted glasses. But it is an attentiveness, being willing to see that which is unexpected, being willing to attend to that which does not correspond to one's preconceptions, which tend to be relatively static, locked in, about other people, about a country, about a race, about a religion, and about an ideology. We have relatively static notions. That's just the nature of notions. They don't shift so much. They're relatively static. Whereas when we attend closely with this mindfulness, what's actually happening here and now, that's fresh. And as we attend to that, take that seriously, that is bound to make us more resilient. In the midst of this, we are bound now moving to a central theme in Buddhism. This mindfulness is a central practice. The central theme of Buddhism is everything we're experiencing, inwardly and outwardly. All of this is subject to change. Nothing in the world remains static. Not George Bush, not communist China, not Argentina, not your spouse, not your children. Nothing stays static. Nothing is the same from day to day. As the Buddha said, everything that arises will perish. Everything that arises, independent upon causes and conditions, is subject to momentary change. It's not only that eventually it will be destroyed or decay or fade away, but everything that arises that is conditioned is always effervescent, arising, 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 momentarily change. And so being attentive to that, taking into that account, not looking onto anything as being static, unchanging, immutable, that will make us resilient. Because we become non-resilient, we become rigid, we become defensive, locked in like a tortoise that withdraws into its shell when we simply can't handle the change. The death of a loved one, the loss of a job, the deterioration of one's portfolio, etc. Unexpected, unwelcomed. And thinking, oh, but my portfolio is secure. I've invested in blue chip stocks. I've invested in a very good bank. I invested all my money in Iceland. It's a very secure, it's a very conservative country. I'm sure that's locked in. It's cold up there. Lots of luck. And so this attentiveness to impermanence, everything subject not only to this coarse decay that everything will pass, Singapore will pass, the United States will pass, everything will pass. And momentarily, everything is in the process of change. Attending to that, engaging with that, makes us more resilient. It's just being realistic. Whereas locking into our relatively frozen notions, that's being unrealistic, and it makes us non-resilient, rigid, and antiquated. We're going, metaphorically or literally, going the way of the dinosaur. We move on from the theme of impermanence to another central theme in Buddhism, which I think, I'm not promoting a religion here, I think these are very existential truths of our own existence. and that is the nature of suffering and the nature of genuine happiness. What actually does provide us with a sense of well-being, a sense of fulfillment, a sense of meaning, a sense of genuine satisfaction. So not simply what psychologists call hedonic pleasure, what turns us on, what gives us a buzz, what gives us a bit of momentary pleasure. Well, I had a really tasty dessert for lunch. This ice cream was quite tasty. Now it's finished. It's gone. So the pleasure I had from that is just a memory, right? It's totally gone. So the pursuit of genuine happiness is not just finding better and better flavors of ice cream, using that as a metaphor, but it's looking now very carefully, attending closely what actually gives not just this hedonic pleasure, kind of a rise of pleasure that then just vanishes as soon as the stimulus is gone, but what gives a deeper sense of fulfillment, of meaning, of satisfaction, a sense of a life well led. What are the true sources of suffering? It is so easy to point the finger. Point the finger. It's the politician, it's the government, it's this business, it's the spouse, it's my children, it's this. And so the fingers are going out. I'm unhappy, I'm feeling dissatisfied, I'm feeling upset, and then the fingers are whipping around like we're the fastest thrower in the West. But you'll notice that when one finger is pointing out, three fingers pointing in, as they say, And so certainly other people, situations, political situations, and so forth, certainly these can catalyze our unhappiness, frustration, unrest, and so forth. But one of the central themes of Buddhism is, while virtually anything could catalyze someone's unhappiness, the root causes of unhappiness, of dissatisfaction, of discontent, of unease, are in fact in the mind. But now we want to be scientists, we want to be empiricists, and say it's not just because I have a mind, it's not just because I have a mind that I am not resilient, that I'm unsatisfied, I'm depressed, or what have you. What specifically in the mind gives rise to such rigidity, unhappiness, frustration, or even despair? So this is really a science of genuine happiness and a science of suffering, of discontent. What are the true causes? And attending to those and not making a mistake. Not making a mistake in an unhappy marriage. I'm so miserable, I'm depressed, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, and it's her fault. And one finger comes out. I found the root of suffering. What the Buddhists call the second noble truth. It's my spouse. Think again. Spouse may have contributed, but frankly, anything can contribute. I was with somebody in the car only a couple of weeks ago. It was Southern California, beautiful sunny day. The person in the car said, I hate this weather. He was really upset. It was like 25 degrees centigrade, it was sunny, it was blue sky. It should be raining. It should be overcast. I really like rain. He was so upset because it was a sunny day. If a sunny day can make someone unhappy, what can't make one unhappy? That's not the root of suffering. Final point, and I will stop. But this one, crucial, this really is an empirical question, a scientific question, not to be answered with merely religious belief, doctrine, and so forth, but what truly brings about a sense of genuine happiness, fulfillment, well-being. Not a certain amount of money, not a prestige, not a house, not a car, not even a spouse or children. They may or may not contribute. What are the true causes? And a final point in Buddhism, which again I think has universal relevance. How do we exist as human beings? And it's very easy. According to Buddhism, there's a deeply ingrained tendency to lock onto ourselves conceptually as I am something quite independent, radically separate from everyone else. I have a body, I have a mind, I'm independent. And even with the sense I'm immutable. That fellow that I was aware of when I woke up this morning, same guy as yesterday. Same guy as 5 years ago. Same guy as 50 years ago. That's just me. As if there's one abiding ego just carrying through time that's immutable, unchanging. The Buddhist answer is, get real. Where's the evidence of this independent agent, this self, that is separate from the body and mind and absolutely separate from the environment and all sentient beings? And to recognize that our very presence here, as individuals, our bodies, our minds, are arising in an ongoing flow of dependent origination. We're always arising in relationship to other people, arising in relationship to the environment, to changing situations, and other people too are not static entities. The same old George Bush, the same old spouse, the same old boss, the same old colleague. They're never the same old. All of us are constantly in a process of change that can be illuminated by being very closely attentive. But here is the theme of recognizing our very nature here, our very identity, is not one of a bunch of isolated egos colliding into each other as if we're individual personality billiard balls. But in fact, our very existence here is one of profound interdependence with each other as fellow human beings, with the broader biosphere of sentient beings, within the broader sphere of the ecosphere, and of course multiple nations, ethnic groups, and so forth. To recognize this profound interdependence, that it is the very nature of our existence, not simply some religious belief, that makes us more resilient. Because we see that now, as we are pursuing our own well-being, to think that I will pursue my well-being and independently of everybody else, I'm going to get mine. Every man for himself, and I'm going to lunge for happiness, try to hold on for dear life, guaranteed not to be resilient. Guaranteed to be frustrated. Because it's based on an unreality. We don't exist as these independent agents, so the notion that I'm going to find my own happiness independent of everybody else, and I'll get there by ramming my elbows into everybody else, knocking them down till I can get my happiness, it's not realistic. And therefore, it doesn't give rise to resilience, it does not give rise necessarily even to survival, and it certainly doesn't give rise to human flourishing. So this theme of interdependence actually is an ontological stance, a fundamental worldview of our own identity and our relationship with the environment that naturally suggests what the Dalai Lama calls universal responsibility, or simply a sense of altruism, that our own well-being as a single individual, as a family, as a nation, as a continent, as an ethnic group, as a religion, as a political ideology, that our very well-being is one of interdependence and therefore altruism. Caring about the greater whole, caring for those around us, is simply a wise strategy for finding happiness, fulfillment, and it is the only strategy for being truly resilient and being able to not only survive, but to flourish as an individual, as a community, and as a species. So, that's what I have to share. I look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you so much.